I'm Lauren Hayes, 34, and after 7 years of marriage to Nathan, I still felt like a guest in his family's carefully curated world. Last summer at their annual backyard gala that masqueraded as a BBQ, I showed up hoping this time would be different. But his sister Sabrina made sure it wasn't. Just as I tried to share a win from my freelance design work, she cut me off, smirking. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The table burst into laughter, including Nathan. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just raised my hot dog like a toast, locked eyes with her, and said, "Challenge accepted." That night I left. No fight, no fanfare. Just the beginning of a story I never expected to write. If you're still with me, let me know where you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and stay with me. Because what happened next rewrote everything I thought I knew about family identity and starting over. I met Nathan Whitmore during our final year at the University of Michigan. I was balancing a full course load in graphic design while working late shifts at a downtown cafe to help cover tuition. He was a business major with a charming smile and a trust fund behind every ambition. Our paths crossed one rainy Thursday evening. He came in soaked and searching for caffeine while I was tucked behind the counter reading a dog-eared copy of The Creative Act. He noticed the book made a thoughtful comment, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation about design marketing and the kind of future we each imagined. It was the kind of connection that felt cinematic, fast, intense, and oddly inevitable. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. He'd walk me home from work, surprise me with sandwiches during my all-nighters, and really listen when I talked about my dreams of running my own design studio someday. By graduation, Nathan proposed with a diamond ring that sparkled like something off a bridal magazine cover. It cost more than my entire student debt, and when I hesitated, overwhelmed by its extravagance, he just said, "You deserve it. You deserve all of this." Looking back now, I realize I mistook his world for stability. I thought marrying him meant merging into something permanent, secure, a new kind of family, one I had always quietly longed for. My own childhood had been shaped by love, yes, but also by scarcity. My mom raised my sister Emily and me on her own working double shifts and bringing home boxed macaroni and secondhand sweaters. Holidays were humble crock-pot dinners, handmade cards and gifts wrapped in last year's comic pages. We didn't have much, but we had each other. The Whitmores, on the other hand, seemed like something out of a lifestyle magazine. They had a manicured colonial house in Westchester, a family crest engraved into their mailbox, and holiday cards professionally photographed and mailed by November 1st every year. Charles Whitmore, Nathan's father, had built a multi-million-dollar firm from scratch, and Evelyn, his mother, curated their social calendar with the precision of a military general. Sabrina, his older sister, was already a vice president at their father's firm before 30. Even Dylan, the youngest, had somehow secured a job at a prestigious investment firm without ever finishing grad school. I walked into that world feeling simultaneously small and hopeful, hopeful that love could bridge the gap between two very different upbringings, hopeful that I could become one of them without losing myself. Nathan made it seem easy at first. He was thoughtful, attentive, and quick to shield me from the sharper edges of his family's remarks. When his mother Evelyn commented on my adorably scrappy design aesthetic, Nathan would squeeze my hand under the table. When Charles launched into his third lecture on how real business works, Nathan would lean over and whisper a joke in my ear. But the thing about fairy tales is you don't realize you're playing a supporting role in someone else's story until the lights go down and no one's looking for you anymore. Back then, I still believed that effort could earn me belonging. That if I loved hard enough, adjusted gracefully enough, and adapted quickly enough, I could be accepted not just by Nathan, but by the entire world he came from. It would take me nearly 7 years to understand how wrong I was. The first time I walked into the Whitmore family home as Nathan's fiancée, I instinctively tightened my grip on my handbag. It wasn't fear exactly, more like awareness. The kind of awareness that flickers through you when you realize you've entered a space where every detail speaks a language you were never taught. Polished mahogany floors, walls lined with portraits and degrees, and a chandelier that looked like it cost more than my college education. Even the scent of the house, something citrusy and expensive, made me feel like I needed to speak softer, move slower, take up less space. Evelyn Whitmore greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Lauren, dear, so lovely to meet you. I've heard such interesting things." She leaned in for a cheek kiss I wasn't prepared for, then held me at arm's length to examine my outfit with a kind of polite curiosity. Charming necklace. Handmade. It was by Emily for my birthday. I smiled, unsure whether it was a compliment or an assessment. From that moment on, it became clear the Whitmores had an entire playbook for how to behave, dress, speak, even laugh. The rules weren't spoken aloud, but they didn't need to be. Every raised eyebrow, every lingering pause after I mispronounced a French wine, every, "Oh, sweetie, we don't do that here," carried the weight of decades of unchallenged expectations. Nathan, to his credit, tried to soften the edges. He'd defend my choices with a casual, "That's what I love about her," or steer the conversation when Sabrina became a little too pointed in her observations. But even his interventions had limits. Deep down, I think he truly believed they'd come around if I just kept showing up. If I were kind enough, polished enough, useful enough. So I tried. God, I tried. I memorized the names of Evelyn's charity boards and volunteered at her garden club fundraiser, even though I didn't know a tulip from a turnip. I designed a holiday card layout for Charles's firm without charging a cent. I bought a cocktail dress in a muted tone because Evelyn once said bright colors were a bit loud for evening events. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I listened to conversations I was never truly invited into. When we hosted our first dinner party after getting married, I spent 2 days preparing, setting the table, arranging the wine, and cooking a meal from scratch. Sabrina arrived with store-bought macarons and immediately took control of the evening, rearranging the seating to balance the flow and casually suggesting I shouldn't overthink dessert. "It's just family after all." Nathan said I was overreacting when I mentioned it later. "That's just Sabrina," he said, as if her behavior were an immutable law of nature. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But meaning isn't always required for harm to take root. The worst part wasn't the occasional cruelty, it was the slow, almost imperceptible erosion. The way my design work became a hobby, the way Evelyn would explain the importance of tone and branding to me, despite never having worked a creative job in her life. The way Charles would redirect every business-related discussion toward Nathan, even when I was the one who brought it up. It was death by 1,000 polite cuts, each one too subtle to name, too small to protest without sounding overly sensitive or ungrateful. Nathan encouraged me to not take it personally, but when your very personhood is what's being minimized, how do you separate the two? What I hadn't realized back then was that the Whitmores didn't see me as one of them. Not really. I was an accessory, a story. Nathan could tell a novelty they could admire from a safe distance, a girl from the real world who'd earned her way into theirs. And as long as I stayed grateful, agreeable, and small, I was welcome to orbit around them. There were exceptions, brief moments of what I mistook for progress. When Sabrina once complimented my website redesign, I floated on that sentence for days, only to hear her later suggest to Nathan that my personal branding felt a little too Etsy. When Charles referred a client to me for a logo project, I poured my soul into the work only for him to revise most of it behind my back, explaining I thought we'd tighten it up a bit. Each moment reinforced the same unspoken truth. Proximity wasn't the same as inclusion. I was invited to be present, not to belong. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a singular explosion or betrayal that I could point to. Just this slow drift, me disappearing inch by inch, until I looked around, and didn't recognize the version of myself that had learned to apologize for existing too brightly. Still, I told myself I was lucky. Still, I believed if I just worked harder, smiled wider, and tried more, acceptance would come. I didn't yet understand that in the Whitmore world, some people were born into the center, and others were tolerated at the edge. And I was learning to live at the edge. In the beginning, I believed marriage meant mutual support, two people holding space for each other's dreams, trading roles when needed, and always circling back to balance. I didn't realize how quickly that idea could be rewritten when the weight of expectation disguised itself as love. Nathan's career took off faster than either of us anticipated. Less than 2 years after our wedding, he was offered the chance to lead a new regional expansion for Whitmore Strategies Group, an opportunity that came with prestige bonuses and, more importantly, to his father, Charles' visibility. The catch was travel. A lot of it. Weekly flights to Chicago, Denver, and San Diego, with longer stints in Tokyo and Frankfurt in the pipeline. The night he got the call, we celebrated with takeout and champagne on our apartment floor. I remember him spinning me around the living room saying, "This is it, Lauren. Everything we worked for. You and me were building something real." And for a moment I believed him. But what we were building turned out to be his future. Mine was quietly set aside like a book placed face down and forgotten on a nightstand. The assumption came wrapped in silence. No one asked if I could keep up with my client base while handling the household alone. No one asked how my design studio, small but growing, would survive without the routine and focus I had carved for it. It was simply understood that I would manage things while Nathan climbed. And I did. I didn't object. I didn't push back. I convinced myself it was temporary, that my turn would come. I began letting go of clients. First the ones with tight deadlines I couldn't juggle solo, then the ones that required in-person meetings. I stopped taking on new projects altogether. I told myself I was simplifying, creating space, but that space filled quickly with Aaron's expectations and Evelyn's endless calendar of family events that I was now responsible for representing us at alone. By the time Nathan started traveling internationally, my world had quietly collapsed inward. Days became silent loops, coffee errands, laundry, polite emails to explain why I couldn't take on a project at the moment. I kept my portfolio updated, kept saying I was between clients, but the truth was more difficult to say out loud. I was fading from the thing that used to make me feel most alive. Worse still, it didn't seem to matter to anyone. At dinner parties, when someone asked what I did, I'd say I'm a graphic designer, and they'd tilt their head politely before asking about Nathan's travels. Evelyn once referred to my studio as a creative outlet in front of a room full of professionals. Sabrina joked that I had the world's most expensive hobby, laughing as if it were charming, not crushing. Nathan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but didn't want to break the spell of his rising success. He'd come home exhausted and distracted, but always grateful in passing. "I don't know how you keep everything running," he'd say, kissing my forehead as he scrolled through emails. "You're amazing." And I was, but not for the reasons he meant. I became the keeper of birthdays and dry cleaning. The one who signed for packages, fixed broken faucets, and handled awkward family obligations with practiced grace. I was praised for my adaptability, my kindness, my willingness to make it all work. But no one saw the cost. Not even me. Until the miscarriage. It happened at 11 weeks. I'd been alone again while Nathan was at a conference in Chicago. The cramping started slowly, and then all at once. The physical pain was sharp, visceral, terrifying. The emotional aftermath was harder to name. Nathan offered to fly home, but when I said I'll be okay, he didn't question it. He sounded almost relieved. Evelyn sent flowers, white lilies, with a card that read, "Perhaps it's for the best until you're more settled." Sabrina texted, "Could the stress from juggling your little business have been a factor?" The only one who showed up was Emily. She drove 8 hours straight from Cincinnati with homemade soup and a bag of fuzzy socks. She held my hand while I sobbed on the kitchen floor. She didn't ask me to explain. She didn't offer platitudes. She just stayed. That week broke something in me. Not loudly, not violently. It broke quietly like a tree cracking under the weight of snow. I didn't tell Nathan how deeply it cut that no one, not even him, had held space for the loss. Or for me. I didn't scream or fight. I simply added it to the growing list of things I was expected to grieve quietly, forgive quickly, and never speak of again. By the time spring returned, I was no longer designing. I was surviving. I still showed up to family events, still smiled in photos, still played the role. But inside, I was shrinking. A ghost of the woman who once dreamed in Pantone swatches and believed design could shape the world. I had become a wife, but I had stopped being Lauren. By the time the Whitmore family's annual summer BBQ came around, I was functioning more out of reflex than presence. The miscarriage had hollowed something in me, and Nathan's growing absence, both physical and emotional, had become background noise I'd taught myself to ignore. My design work was dormant, my social circle had withered, and my daily life revolved around maintaining a sense of normal that no longer existed. But I still hoped. Some fragile part of me clung to the idea that this year's BBQ might be different. That maybe after 7 years of smiling through slights and proving my devotion in countless invisible ways, I might finally be seen not as Nathan's wife, not as Evelyn's social obligation, or Sabrina's conversational punching bag, but as myself. I baked my grandmother's strawberry shortcake for the event. It was the only thing the family had ever complimented without caveat, and I needed desperately one thing that felt like mine. I spent hours whipping cream from scratch, slicing berries just the way my grandmother had taught me, layering everything with the precision of a dessert that carried history, not just sugar. Nathan, meanwhile, was preoccupied with last-minute logistics for an upcoming trip to Tokyo. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Dad's unveiling his new imported smoker today," he reminded me as we walked out the door. "Try to act impressed even if you don't get the big deal." I nodded, shortcake in my lap, sundress pressed, and chosen specifically to match Evelyn's unspoken dress code, casual elegance, which really meant not too bold. The Whitmore estate was already buzzing when we arrived. Caterers wove through clusters of guests. Evelyn's laughter sparkled like glass, and Charles stood on the patio surrounded by admirers as he displayed his latest culinary toy with the enthusiasm of a man who'd never been questioned. Sabrina spotted us first. She air-kissed Nathan, then turned to me with a once-over so quick it felt like a body scan. "Lauren, that dress is so cheerful," she said, which I knew by now was her way of calling it too much. "The kitchen's a bit crowded, but I'm sure you can find somewhere to put that." She gestured vaguely at the dessert in my hands, then whisked Nathan away by the elbow before I could reply. I stood alone for a moment, shortcake still in hand. The kitchen, as promised, was chaotic. Evelyn directed caterers like a general commanding troops. When she noticed me in the doorway, her expression softened into something rehearsed. "Oh, Lauren, dear. You didn't need to bring anything. We've got Petit Cherie handling desserts this year." "But how thoughtful. Maybe just find a shelf in the pantry." I placed my shortcake on a crowded shelf of miscellaneous guest offerings. As I turned to leave, I heard Evelyn murmur to a staff member, "Make sure Sabrina's tiramisu goes front and center, please." That was the moment it shifted. Not dramatically, quietly, precisely. The rest of the afternoon blurred. Every conversation was shallow. Every attempt I made to engage was interrupted or rerouted. I offered to help with setup, politely declined. Tried to talk film with one of Nathan's cousins, redirected. Charlotte Dillon's wife, who'd married into the family just 2 years earlier, was paraded around as our brilliant Jenna, the pediatric surgeon. Sabrina included her in family stories she hadn't lived while I was still referred to as Nathan's wife. Lunch arrived. I sat between Nathan's elderly uncle who couldn't hear and an empty chair reserved for Sabrina. Nathan sat across from me, already immersed in business talk with his father. When Sabrina arrived, the room reoriented itself around her stories, laughter, attention. During a lull, I took a breath and said quietly, but clearly, I just wrapped a branding project for a new bakery downtown. Their grand opening is next weekend. Sabrina didn't miss a beat. Is that the place with the tacky neon sign I drove past it yesterday? It's actually vintage inspired, I explained. They wanted to honor the building's history. Sabrina sighed theatrically and turned toward the table. If you disappeared tomorrow, she said, no one would even notice. That's how boring this conversation is. The table erupted. They laughed. Evelyn tittered. Charles guffawed. Even Nathan chuckled as he reached for his beer. And I froze. It was one of those moments where time contracts and expands all at once. I could feel the heat in my face, the cold in my hands. 7 years of swallowed offenses, subtle humiliations, and quiet disregard converged into one crystal clear realization. This was not a misunderstanding. This was exactly how they saw me. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't beg Nathan with my eyes to say something, anything. I raised my hot dog in a mock toast, looked Sabrina directly in the eye, and said, "Challenge accepted." The table fell silent, just for a moment. Then Evelyn clapped her hands and chirped, "Who's ready for Charles to carve the brisket?" The moment passed, but I didn't. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching, not participating, watching. I observed how easily Nathan slipped back into their world, how no one thought to check if I was okay, how every smile toward me was surface deep. And beneath that silence, something old in me crumbled and something new began to stir. The spell had broken. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't stay here anymore. The car ride home from the BBQ was unusually quiet. Nathan scrolled through emails on his phone, occasionally reading snippets aloud about his Tokyo itinerary or the gift he needed to pick up for Charles's birthday. I watched the blur of suburban trees roll past the passenger window, hearing every word but feeling none of them. My body was there. My mind was elsewhere, already moving. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally looked at me. "You've been quiet since lunch. Everything okay?" I turned toward him, slowly weighing my words like something fragile in my mouth. "Sabrina's joke. About me disappearing." He sighed. "Lauren, not this again. She was just being Sabrina. You know how she gets at family events." "You laughed." He blinked. "It was a joke. You're taking it too seriously." And just like that, the conversation ended. Not because it reached a resolution, but because Nathan got out of the car, closing the door, and the moment in one simple gesture. That night, while he slept beside me, breathing steady and undisturbed, I stared at the ceiling and replayed everything. Not just the BBQ, not just the tiramisu and the laughter and the strawberry shortcake in the pantry. Everything. The late nights I stayed up editing pitch decks for Nathan while putting my own client proposals on hold. The times I dressed like someone else just to blend in at Evelyn's dinner parties. The way my ideas were smiled at but never taken seriously. The loss of our child. The echoing silence that followed it. And beneath it all, the unrelenting hum of a single message: "You are tolerated, not loved, not chosen, just tolerated." At 2:14 a.m., I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to my home office. I opened my laptop, typed in my bank credentials, and began to assess what I'd have access to if I left. Then I searched apartment listings not in New York, in Portland, Oregon, where Emily lived, where no one called my dreams adorable or ambitious like it was a flaw. By dawn, I had a folder labeled Plan A. When Nathan left for golf with Charles later that morning, he kissed my cheek without looking up from his phone. "Don't forget the dry cleaning." I didn't respond, just waited until the front door clicked shut, and the engine faded into distance. Then I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Brooke Carter came the familiar voice on the other end. "I need a massive favor," I said, exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks. Her answer came without hesitation. "Name it. I'm leaving Nathan today. Can you come help me pack?" 2 hours later, she pulled into the driveway with coffee moving boxes and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen since college determination and quiet fury on my behalf. We worked with methodical urgency. I didn't want everything. I didn't need revenge. I wanted essentials: my design equipment, personal documents, photos of my mother clothes I actually liked. Brooke offered to store whatever didn't fit in my car. While she organized the boxes, I handled the finances. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings, no more, no less. I paid my share of the monthly bills and canceled or transferred the services in my name. I printed a clean list of everything I had taken. By mid-afternoon, the house that once felt too big now felt like a museum of someone else's life. I wrote Nathan a letter. Not emotional, not bitter, just clear. I told him I was leaving to reevaluate our marriage, that I had taken only what was mine, that I needed no contact while I figured out what came next. I placed the note on the kitchen counter with my wedding ring resting on top of it. Beside them, I left a piece of paper with a single sentence scrawled in black ink. Sabrina's words: "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." Date, location, verbatim. Then I walked through the house one last time. Not to say goodbye, but to make sure I hadn't left behind anything essential, anything of me. Before stepping out, I paused at the hallway table, where our wedding photo still sat in its silver frame. We looked so young in that picture. So sure. His smile had once felt like safety, mine like belief. I whispered, "Thank you not for the love, but for the clarity." Then I closed the door softly behind me, and walked away without looking back. Driving west, each highway marker felt like a mile away from erasure and closer to something I couldn't yet name. Not quite freedom, not yet peace, but the beginning of a return. Not to a version of myself I once was, but to a woman no longer willing to be small, just to be allowed to stay. The first thing I noticed when I crossed into Oregon was the rain. It didn't pour, it whispered. A steady hush that tapped against my windshield, like a gentle reminder, "You made it." After 7 hours of driving, I pulled into a modest roadside motel just outside Portland, keyed in under my middle name, and carried my life distilled into 5 boxes and a suitcase into a room that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and possibility. The bedspread was floral and outdated. The lighting buzzed faintly. It was a far cry from the curated luxury of the Whitmore estate or Evelyn's Pinterest-perfect guest rooms. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could exhale. I texted Brooke and Emily, "I'm safe. Don't tell anyone where I am. I need quiet." Then I turned off my phone. That night, wrapped in unfamiliar linens and surrounded by silence, I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months, maybe years. Emily had already found me a short-term rental in her neighborhood, a small furnished studio in southeast Portland, with creaky hardwood floors, bay windows, and a kitchen no bigger than Evelyn's pantry. But it was perfect, because it was mine. "It's nothing fancy," Emily had warned. "It's everything I need," I said, running my hand along the worn counter like it was a relic. The first week blurred into a rhythm of practical rebirth. I opened a new bank account at a local credit union. I updated my freelance profiles and deleted old work that bore the thumbprint of the Whitmore's brand aesthetic. I bought a prepaid phone with an Oregon number and used Brooke's address to forward what little mail I needed. Gregory No Nathan texted, called, then texted again. The messages shifted from confusion to anger to pleading, all without ever mentioning why I left. Not a single line about the joke, the laughter, the years of silence, just demands for contact, for explanation, for closure on his terms. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I had nothing left to explain. I wasn't trying to be seen anymore. I was learning how to see myself again. On a drizzly Tuesday, I wandered into a local cafe that Emily had recommended. Meredith's, it was called. Not trendy, not curated, just real. Brick walls, handwritten menus, mismatched chairs, and a mural that stretched across the back wall in shades of ochre and cobalt. I stood in front of it for a long time. "Beautiful, right?" the barista said. "Local artist. Meredith commissioned it. She's looking for someone to redo our menus and promo flyers." I blinked. Seriously? Seriously. 1 hour later, I found myself sitting across from Meredith Grant, a silver-haired woman in her 50s, with paint under her nails and eyes that saw through pretense like glass. "Show me your personal work," she said, waving away the digital portfolio I had queued on my tablet. "Not the polished stuff. The stuff you do because you have to." I hesitated, then opened a hidden folder on my drive: sketches, unfinished concepts, old mood boards from the years before I became Nathan Whitmore's wife. Things that never fit into any client brief. Things that were mine. She scrolled through silently, then looked up. "You've been hiding." I nodded. No explanation needed. "You're hired," she said, on one condition. "What's that?" "You bring me one personal piece every week. I don't care if it's good. I care that you're finding your voice again." That was how it began. The slow, deliberate process of piecing myself back together, not by returning to who I was, but by creating who I needed to be now. Meredith introduced me to local business owners who needed brand work. Emily brought over homemade lentil soup and late-night reassurance. Brooke handled shipping the rest of my things in unmarked boxes. I started therapy twice a week at first, then weekly with a woman named Dr. Anders, who never once asked, "Why didn't you just leave sooner?" Instead, she asked, "What did they make you believe about yourself?" It wasn't one session that cracked me open, it was dozens. Quiet, careful unraveling of the story I'd accepted for too long, that being included required being smaller, softer, silent. By the second month, I had 3 steady clients. The work wasn't flashy ebook layouts, social templates, but it paid the rent and reminded me I was capable. I even started waking up before my alarm again. That was the first real sign of healing, the return of energy that wasn't borrowed from survival. And in the quiet hours between deadlines, I created just for myself. Posters, sketches, words turned into textures, color stories pulled from rain and grief and slow joy. Each time I hit save, I felt a little more real. I hadn't disappeared. I had reappeared on my own terms in my own time, with no applause and no audience but my own breath and resolve. I was building something again. Not for the Whitmores. Not for Nathan. For me. And I wasn't finished yet. By month 4 in Portland, I had begun to feel something I hadn't felt in years: momentum. The slow, steady kind. Not fireworks, but warm coals. Meredith's menu redesign had evolved into a full brand refresh, and thanks to her word-of-mouth recommendations, I found myself juggling real paying clients again. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't flying to Europe or speaking on panels. But I was designing, and more importantly, I was creating from a place that felt honest. And that honesty was starting to attract the right kind of attention. The turning point arrived on a Wednesday in the form of an email. Subject: seeking designer for national campaign. I nearly deleted it, assuming it was a generic solicitation or worse, spam. But then I saw the sender, Thomas Vance, creative director, Westwood Creative. A name I recognized from industry forums and design circles. The body of the message was short, direct. "Your work on the Rainier Artisan Foods rebrand caught our attention. We're seeking a lead designer for a campaign with Hawthorne and Finch Consumer Goods. We believe your aesthetic would be a strong fit. Let us know if you're interested in a preliminary meeting. My stomach flipped. Hawthorne and Finch. A familiar name. Too familiar. It took less than a minute to confirm what my gut already knew. Hawthorne and Finch was a subsidiary of Whitmore Strategies Group, Nathan's family business. I stared at the screen for several minutes, the cursor blinking like a quiet dare. There was no mention of the Whitmores in the message. Thomas had likely found me through Meredith's cafe or the Rainier case study that had been featured in a small design blog. Maybe it was pure coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I could have said no. I could have walked away, rationalized that revisiting anything remotely tied to that name was too messy, too triggering. But then I remembered how Sabrina had laughed at my work, how Charles had rewritten my designs without asking, how Evelyn had once said, "Branding is really more intuition than skill, don't you think?" And I remembered the pantry, the strawberry shortcake, the shelf. I was no longer the woman who stood quietly by while someone else set the narrative. If the Whitmores were involved, I'd find out soon enough. But if this opportunity was legitimate, and I believed it was, I wouldn't reject it just because of an old name on a parent company filing. So I replied, "Yes, I'm interested." The first Zoom call with Westwood was seamless. Thomas was sharp but easy to talk to, and his team treated me like a peer, not an accessory. They'd loved the Rainier rebrand, especially its quiet confidence, as Thomas put it. They weren't looking for flash. They were looking for identity. I could do identity. I'd fought to rebuild mine from nothing. We signed a short-term contract within a week. My scope was clear: lead design on Hawthorne and Finch's new organic product line, including packaging, digital assets, and branding guidelines. No red tape, no mention of Whitmore strategies, at least not yet. For 3 weeks, the project moved forward beautifully. My drafts received enthusiastic feedback. My timelines were respected. I worked long hours, but not because I had to prove myself, simply because I wanted to, until the email came. Subject: event invitation, marketing innovation, Gala Sheffield Pavilion, downtown Portland. Black tie optional. A major unveiling of Hawthorne and Finch's new line. As lead designer, my attendance was highly encouraged, and in the list of VIP attendees listed just above the line break were 4 words: Charles Whitmore and family. I closed the laptop, then reopened it, then stood up and walked outside into the rain. That evening I brought the email to therapy. "I don't know if I can do this," I told Dr. Anders. "You don't have to," she said. "But that's not the real question, is it?" "No," I admitted. "The real question is, do I want to?" She nodded. "And what would be different this time? I wouldn't be standing in a borrowed dress holding a dessert no one asked for." I spent the next 3 days thinking, not spiraling thinking. I weighed the risk, the emotions, the memory of laughter that wasn't mine. But mostly I thought about the younger version of me who had once been erased in plain sight, and about the woman I had since become, who now ran a business under her own name, in her own city, in her own voice. By Sunday I had made my decision. I emailed Thomas and confirmed my attendance. Then I made an appointment with a stylist Emily recommended and set aside part of my project advance for what I told myself wasn't a costume, but armor. The Whitmores might be in that room, but I wouldn't be there to impress them. I'd be there because I'd earned my place at the table, and I intended to take up every inch of space that once belonged to someone else's shadow. The evening of the gala arrived with the kind of quiet clarity that feels like stepping into your own name for the first time. I stood in front of the mirror in my small Portland apartment, adjusting the neckline of the deep emerald jumpsuit the stylist had helped me select. It was structured, bold, and unapologetically mine, just like the woman wearing it. Gone was the delicate pastel I might have worn to please Evelyn Whitmore. Gone was the hesitant smile, the slouched shoulders, the eyes scanning for approval. In their place, posture, presence, precision. My bobbed hair was tucked behind one ear, revealing a pair of subtle gold hoops. My makeup was minimal, but intentional. My shoes, 3 inches taller than comfort demanded, made me feel grounded, not elevated. And most of all, I felt calm. Not because I knew what would happen, but because I knew who I was, regardless of who might be watching. The venue was a restored theater in downtown Portland, all velvet and vintage chandeliers. At check-in, I received my name badge, accepted the gala's signature elderflower cocktail, and took a deep breath. Within minutes, Thomas spotted me near the entrance and waved me over. "Lauren, perfect timing, let me introduce you to the Sheffield team." I smiled. "Lead the way." For the next 40 minutes, I moved from circle to circle like water through stone. Creative directors, brand managers, local press. Every introduction met me with interest, not skepticism. Every handshake acknowledged what I brought, not who I belonged to. When someone complimented my recent work for Rainier Artisan Foods, I accepted it without deflecting. I had earned this moment, one client, one draft, one late night at a time. And then, like a shift in barometric pressure, I felt them. The Whitmores had arrived. I didn't need to turn around. I knew Charles's laugh too well. I'd felt Evelyn's perfume before. They entered like gravity, soft but impossible to ignore. I allowed myself one glance. Charles held court near the bar, gesturing grandly. Evelyn was already making her way through the room with surgical charm. Nathan stood just behind them, thinner than I remembered, his posture still perfect, but somehow deflated. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. I held his gaze, not coldly, not warmly, just steady. And then I turned away. Back to the bartender. Back to the life I had built without them. Charles approached me near the event program table 20 minutes later. "Lauren," he said, his voice carefully measured. "Didn't expect to see you here. I'm leading the design team for the Hawthorne and Finch rebrand," I replied evenly. "You'll see my work during the presentation." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Westwood's handling the campaign." I nodded. "Thomas brought me on. We've had strong preliminary feedback." He cleared his throat. "Well, your work's evolved." "Not evolved," I said, a small smile curving the corner of my mouth. "It's just finally been allowed to exist as it is." He blinked, then gave a clipped nod before excusing himself to find Evelyn. I watched him walk away, shoulders slightly tighter than before. The presentation was scheduled for the center of the evening, just after the seated dinner began. Thomas guided me backstage while the Sheffield executives introduced the campaign. As I stepped toward the side of the stage, Sabrina appeared in front of me, like a ghost conjured by old tension. "No one mentioned you were involved with this project," she said, the corners of her mouth twitching toward a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Westwood brought me on months ago," I replied, voice even. "Thomas, this is Sabrina Whitmore." Thomas extended a hand. "Pleasure to meet you. Lauren's been phenomenal to work with." Sabrina's expression tightened. "She's family, well, was." "Nice to meet you," Thomas said flatly. "We need to get Lauren prepped." We walked away before she could respond. The presentation itself passed like muscle memory. I spoke about sustainability and typography, with the same cadence I once used to explain brand identity to clients who didn't believe in it, until they saw it live. I showed packaging prototypes, walked through color theory, even fielded a few questions from the audience, including one from Charles about rollout timelines. I answered without flinching. When the presentation ended, I stood in the spotlight and saw them all seated together in the second row. Evelyn's face unreadable, Charles nodding, Sabrina whispering to a woman beside her, and Nathan watching me with something between disbelief and recognition. The applause came not in polite bursts, but in sustained waves. I stepped back into the wings, not shaking, not buzzing, just grounded. And for the first time, it wasn't because I had proven them wrong. It was because I no longer needed to. After the presentation, everything moved in a blur of handshakes and clipped compliments. People I had never met, agency directors, consultants, brand managers, came up to say words like inspiring, refreshing, exceptional. Each one offered a card or asked to connect. But I wasn't scanning the crowd for praise. I was waiting for the inevitable. And it came exactly as I expected. Nathan approached me just as I was gathering my materials near the side of the stage. He looked like someone who had prepared a script and lost the first page. "You look well," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Really well." "Thank you," I replied. Calm, even. "I didn't know you were in Portland." "That was intentional." He nodded, accepting the truth like something sour in his mouth. "Your presentation was impressive. You always were talented." I met his gaze, unblinking. "I always am talented." The correction landed. Nathan looked down, exhaled, then looked back up with something real in his eyes. "I've been in therapy since you left." At first I didn't get it. Why you didn't say more? Why you just disappeared? "I left a letter." "I know," he said quickly. "I mean emotionally." I didn't get it emotionally. But I do now. Or I'm starting to. He shifted, uneasy. "That day at the barbecue, when Sabrina made that comment about you disappearing, I've replayed it 100 times. How I laughed, how everyone did, and how you just stared her down." I didn't understand what was happening then, but now I think that was the moment you stopped being mine. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence between us held more than any spoken apology. He cleared his throat. "I miss you, Lauren." I nodded slowly, the words arriving with surprising ease. "I believe you. But I also think what you miss might be comfort, not partnership." A long pause. Then, "Is there any chance, maybe not now, but someday for us?" I studied his face. Still familiar, still kind in parts, but no longer mine. "I think we've both become different people," I said gently. "And I like who I'm becoming now." He nodded, the kind of nod that carried both regret and respect. "You were always stronger than I gave you credit for." "We both were," I said. "You just needed different circumstances to realize it." He smiled, then small, sad, genuine. "Take care of yourself, Lauren." "You too, Nathan." We parted with a brief platonic hug. It felt like closure, not cinematic, not dramatic, just human. Evelyn found me later that evening in the courtyard, just as I was sipping sparkling water alone. She appeared beside me like a well-trained socialite, effortless and composed. "Lauren," she said, her voice perfectly balanced, "you were magnificent tonight." I turned to face her. "Thank you. I admit, I wasn't prepared to see you up there, in that role. I wasn't prepared to become invisible," I replied. "But I adapted." A pause, just long enough to register. "I suppose we didn't make it easy for you," she said. The closest thing to an apology I would ever receive from Evelyn Whitmore. "No," I said. "You made it survivable, but not livable." She looked away, jaw tightening. "Gregory was devastated when you left." "Gregory," I said gently, "was inconvenienced." "That's not the same." Silence stretched between us. Then she tried again, softer. "You've changed." "I've reverted," I said, "to someone I actually recognize." She exhaled through her nose, sharp but not cruel. "Will you be attending the closing dinner tomorrow night?" "Yes. Westwood has a table." She nodded. "The salmon is usually excellent." And just like that she drifted away. No reconciliation, no tears, just mutual recognition. Two women who would never be close, but could now stand in the same space without shrinking. The final encounter that night came from the last person I expected, Sabrina. She intercepted me near the coat check, coffee in hand, her signature smirk softened by uncertainty. "I've been thinking about what you said." Back then she began no pretense this time. "At the BBQ, after my joke." I said nothing. "It wasn't just a joke, was it?" she asked. "No," I said. "It was a declaration. One you made casually, one I answered deliberately." She looked down at her drink. "I never thought you'd actually leave. You didn't think I was allowed to." That landed harder than she expected. "I meant what I said earlier," she muttered. "Your work is good, like really good." "Thank you," I said without over-smiling. "It's always been good. It just wasn't your taste." She nodded slowly, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Maybe my taste is changing." And with that, she turned and walked away. As I left the venue that night, heels clicking on tile, the air outside hit my skin like freedom. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt intact. I had walked back into a room that once erased me and left whole, and that more than any applause was the truest form of return. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my hotel room window like quiet permission. I sat by the edge of the bed sipping black coffee and watching the light inch across the floor, aware maybe for the first time that I no longer carried their names in my bloodstream. The Whitmores. Even now, the name felt like a brand more than a family. But last night had proven something: I didn't belong to them anymore. And I didn't need to. At the closing workshop later that day, I wore something simple. Not a statement, not armor. Just my self-structured slacks, a navy blouse flats that allowed me to move without pain. Because I wasn't stepping into a fight anymore, I was just showing up for the life I was rebuilding. The energy in the room was different. Conversations from the night before had shifted perceptions. People sought me out, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. The questions were thoughtful, the tone professional. I was no longer the ex-wife of someone important. I was important. During a break, I stepped outside into the hotel courtyard for some air. The sky was overcast again, but the Portland kind, the kind that hugs your skin instead of hiding the sun completely. That's when Evelyn appeared. Again unannounced. Again composed. "You always did know where to find the quiet spots," she said, smoothing the front of her blazer. "I like places where I can breathe," I replied. She nodded, hands clasped in front of her. "Gregory isn't the same since you left." I didn't take the bait. I just looked at her. "He's learning," she added. "But it's slow. Growth usually is," I said gently. We stood in silence for a moment before she said something I didn't expect. "You always had strength, Lauren. I just didn't recognize it because it didn't look like mine." There was no dramatic music, no sweeping gesture, just a rare moment of honesty from a woman who had spent most of her life curating image over intimacy. "I hope," I said slowly, "that if I ever become someone's mother-in-law, I remember what it's like to be new, to want to belong without disappearing." Her jaw tightened, not in defense, but in understanding. "That's fair," she said. Then, like the closing of a chapter, she adjusted the strap on her purse and offered a small nod. "The salmon tonight should be excellent." We both smiled at the strange, perfect normalcy of it. That night's dinner was the last formal event of the conference. Westwood and the Whitmores sat at different tables. No tension, no politics, just a natural divide that reflected the new order of things. Charles stopped by to congratulate me again, this time with the measured warmth of a man who understood influence. Nathan gave a short presentation on digital integration. He was good as he'd always been, but even he seemed to know the room saw me differently now. The most surprising moment came during Sabrina's segment on emerging market trends. One of the slides behind her included a Hawthorne and Finch mock-up, my design, and beneath it a small caption, "Design Lead, Lauren Hayes, Westwood Creative." She didn't skip it. She didn't gloss over it. She let it linger on the screen just long enough to be noticed, then moved on. It wasn't approval, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. After dinner, I skipped the after party and walked back to my room alone. Not because I felt excluded, but because I didn't need the noise anymore. Inside, I kicked off my heels and pulled the curtains open. Portland's city lights shimmered in soft reflection. I stood barefoot at the window and whispered, "You made it." Not back to something, but forward into something new. For years, I thought power meant belonging. That to be invited into rooms, into families, into legacies was the goal. But now I understood something far simpler and far more liberating. Power is the ability to choose where you go and who you are when no one else is choosing for you. The Whitmores hadn't seen me disappear, but now they'd witnessed my return. Not to them, to myself. 6 weeks after the gala, I found myself standing in the middle of a sunlit kitchen in a home I had purchased with my own income, under my own name, and furnished with nothing but intentionality. It wasn't large, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. A 2-bedroom cottage tucked near the water on the east side of Portland, worn hardwood floors, paint-chipped windows that begged to be left open, and a back patio just wide enough for a chair, a coffee mug, and the sound of birds at 6 a.m. No gates, no guest wings, no inherited expectations, just space that held nothing but the life I was choosing to build. I hadn't planned to buy so soon, but one afternoon while sketching logos at my favorite cafe, Meredith nudged the newspaper toward me. "This one's underpriced," she said, "and it's got your name all over it." She was right. I toured the place the next day and signed the offer within the week. Because the truth was, after everything, I wasn't just starting over. I was anchoring in. And this time I wanted my roots to reflect me. My work had taken on a different rhythm since the Sheffield campaign. Word spread after the gala, and suddenly I was fielding inquiries from clients who respected my process, who valued my perspective, not in spite of my story, but because of the depth it gave my voice. There was a quiet kind of magic in that shift. Not explosive success, not viral fame, but sustainable validation. Meredith's coffee shop had turned into a kind of creative hub. I'd meet clients at the corner table near the mural, the one I used to stare at in silence. Now that table heard business pitches, contract negotiations, and the sound of my laughter echoing without caution. Even Jessica came to visit again, stepping off the plane with a grin and a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor of my new living room, eating noodles straight from the pot, and talking about how different I sounded. "You laugh with your chest now," she said mid-bite. "It used to be all throat, tight, guarded." "I laugh with ownership," I told her. "It's different when the air you breathe is finally yours." Therapy continued, though less frequently. My sessions with Dr. Anders had moved from survival mode to rebuilding mode, what she called post-trauma integration. She said healing wasn't about returning to a former version of yourself, but integrating every scar into something stronger, more complete. "I don't want to be who I was before Nathan," I said once, surprised at my own clarity. "I want to be who I was always meant to become." And I meant it. I was no longer designing from fear of not being enough, of being invisible, of losing belonging. Now I designed from presence, from knowing that even if no one clapped, even if no one noticed, the work was real, because I gave it life. Charlotte reached out in late spring this time, through a professional email. Subject line: design help for a pediatric clinic I volunteer with. We met for coffee. What started as a project consult became an hour-long conversation about how families fracture and rebuild in strange, imperfect ways. She didn't push. I didn't perform. We just existed as two women who had both married into the same gilded cage and found in different ways how to unlatch the door. "Amanda's taking parenting classes," she said over her chai. "She's expecting, trying to break some cycles." That news didn't sting the way it might have a year ago. It just landed. Quiet. Real. Change starts in strange places, I said. Sometimes it begins with watching someone else walk away. Charlotte nodded. She still talks about that barbecue. So do I said. But not with anger. Just as a marker. The place I stopped editing myself for applause. That summer, the local design community invited me to speak at a creative conference. Not a keynote, just a panel. But when I stood on that stage microphone clipped to my collar palms, dry voice steady, I realized I wasn't sharing a story of escape. I was offering a blueprint, a way for others to reclaim themselves in spaces that had asked them to shrink. And as the applause rose, soft, respectful, earned, I felt none of the old desperation, just gratitude, not for recognition, for alignment. Sometimes we measure recovery in dramatic arcs, but more often it looks like this: a clean workspace, a full inbox, a room filled with furniture you chose, a silence that doesn't feel like punishment, but peace, and a laugh that starts in your belly and makes its way out unfiltered. The Whitmores hadn't disappeared from the world, but they had receded from mine, not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with proportion. And in that space, I didn't just rebuild, I reclaimed. On the 1-year anniversary of the Whitmore Summer Barbecue, I didn't think about tiramisu or strawberry shortcake. I didn't flinch at the memory of laughter that wasn't mine. I didn't wonder if they remembered the moment I raised a hot dog like a toast and said challenge accepted. Instead, I opened the windows of my Portland home and let the breeze carry the scent of coffee and rosemary through the kitchen. I brewed a fresh pot, watered the potted plants on the sill, and returned to my desk, where I now sat, not as someone proving her worth, but as a woman fully aware of it. The life I have now is quiet but deliberate. Not every day is easy, not every decision simple. But everything around me, every object, every conversation, every line of design is chosen. Nothing here is inherited. Nothing here is permissioned. It is all built piece by careful piece by me. And that is its own kind of power. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not fighting harder to stay, if I wish I had tried to change them. But what I've learned is this: you don't have to stay where you're unseen just to prove you deserve to be visible. You can leave. You can rebuild. You can reclaim yourself so completely that the version of you who once waited for approval feels like a story you've outgrown, not with shame, but with clarity. Because disappearing from their world didn't mean I vanished. It meant I found a different one, a better one where my work is valued, not diminished, one where my laughter isn't stifled, one where I don't exist in someone else's shadow but stand in my own light. This isn't a story about revenge, it's about reclamation, about choosing to walk away, not in anger, but in wholeness. Because sometimes the most radical act isn't confrontation, it's departure. And the most powerful comeback, it's not showing them who you are. It's remembering it for yourself and living it without apology. So if someone once made you feel like your absence wouldn't matter, make it your mission to build a life where your presence is undeniable. Because the opposite of disappearing isn't being noticed. It's being fully present in a life that's yours. Have you ever walked away from a place where you weren't seen, only to find more of yourself on the other side? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need the reminder. You don't need permission to be whole, and your worth. It was never theirs to measure. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are, stay visible, for you.